The Objective. To deliver the NBA to you like no other. News. Play breakdowns. Power rankings. Storylines you never hear talked about. Anywhere else. It's all straight shots here. Fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here, as always. Lauren joining me, as always. Lauren, have you been watching the March Madness by any chance?
Oh, yeah.
Crazy game.
My brackets are not doing that bad. Surprisingly.
Oh, really?
They're actually...
Really?
I'm not in, like, crazy big pools, but there's probably, like, couple hundred people in the two ones that I'm in, and I'm not doing so bad. So I'm...
Okay. Okay.
Just no big deal. Just a little flex.
Just a little flex. Well, you're not. I don't know if there are any perfect brackets remaining. I haven't checked, but I'm assuming there aren't that many perfect brackets left. There was like 22 after day one, and there was still crazy upsets that happened. So I don't know. We'll see, ladies and gentlemen. The thing I wanted to bring up was the Michigan State versus Kansas State game. Which was just wild. Went to overtime. Marquise Noel, he had like 19 assists. The dude was just awesome. It was amazing. I was watching it as I was walking my dog, and people could just see me like yelling in the street. I was like, oh! I was going crazy. It's been a wild March, tournament. It always is. It always is drama filled and whatnot. And it's kind of winding down. Excited to see who ends up pulling it out. But ladies and gentlemen, it's March Mania also at Sports Interaction, the NHL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and of course, March Madness itself. So much going on, so much to talk about. It's bananas. Play Pinata Picks and Minute Madness, exclusive games you can't play anywhere else. Use the QR code on your screen that you see at the bottom of your screen right there to download, or visit sportsinteraction.com/STPN. 19 plus, please play responsibly. Now, speaking of playing responsibly, or maybe not playing as responsibly as they should be on defense and other things. Want to talk about the Dallas Mavericks, your Dallas Mavericks, Lauren. I'll just throw out some stuff at you, okay?
Go for it.
And you, obviously, yesterday, or at least for the people who are listening right now, 2 days ago, it was the Warriors and Mavericks game that went down to the wire. Warriors ended up pulling it out by 2. Those 2 points seem to be a point of contention, no pun intended, for Mark Cuban, who is apparently going to be filing a protest about the clip. Yes, it's a viral clip by now. If you haven't seen it, I'm pretty surprised you're listening to an NBA podcast. I mean, realistically, if you haven't seen it, why are you tuning in? But we appreciate you if you're tuning in regardless, because we're here to inform you, folks. So, There was a moment, I believe, late in the third quarter where Dallas thought that they were supposed to have the ball. The Warriors ended up having the ball, and Dallas lined up on the opposite side of the court thinking that they were going to have the ball. And they didn't. The Warriors ended up scoring a wide open basket. Again, you can search it online, see the footage for yourself. Maybe our producer, Drew, if we're nice enough, he can get it to smack dab, throw it on here for us. But that's what happened. They lost by 2 points. Mark Cuban was not the least bit happy. I guess before we get into the whole, everything that's happened with the Dallas Mavericks post All-Star break, how do you feel about that situation? The whole protest thing, the game that went down, and obviously how important it was. Now the Mavericks, the Warriors have the tiebreaker over you guys when it comes to that 6-seed battle. So puts you guys in a tough position playoff-wise as well. So I guess how did that game go down from your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, going into the game, there just hasn't been a whole lot of confidence around this team. That, to me, is just kind of you got Luka, you got Kyrie. Sometimes they're both playing together, and sometimes it's really fun to watch. But even that being said, they can each go off for 30-plus, and they still don't win games because they can't play any defense and they can't rebound the basketball, which are two very basic things you need to be able to do. And when you're going against a Warriors team that is prone to high-volume turnovers over and over again, I mean, you'd like to. Jesus, oh my Lord.
Winston
So
was not
sorry
happy about
that.
the Mavericks' performance either.
He's not having it. He is not having it. But yeah, you'd like to think that, hey, okay, you're going against a team that's prone to make a lot of turnovers. Maybe we can maximize off of that. And even with no Kyrie. And so you always think that you have somewhat of a chance, especially with the Warriors' struggles. But again, there just wasn't a whole lot of confidence. And so with that situation specifically and protesting calls like that, personally, I mean, I guess go for it, but I don't ever really, this is my personal opinion, anytime a call gets protested like that, I can't help but ask, okay, well, if it ended up being like a 6-point loss or an 8-point loss, would you still be, and so to me, because of that, I can't really put a whole lot of weight into it, like the specific protesting. The whole situation is still very fuzzy about what was communicated to who from the officials and why it wasn't really addressed after the fact, even in the game. Like there's still a lot of confusion about what happened, but that obviously wasn't the deciding play of the game. I think it'd be a much bigger thing if it were, but it wasn't. It wasn't even in the fourth quarter. And so the protests, I mean, it is what it is. I'm interested to hear.
It's a little bit desperate.
Yeah, it's desperate. That's a good word for it, because it's like, okay, you can try, and I'm curious to hear what they say, because I do think that the officials mishandled the situation, but it's not what decided the game. The Mavericks are really struggling, and I don't know that it's going to get much better, and certainly didn't help that loss.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the officials have become such a talking point late in the season. And I think that happens when there are, so many close games and so many games with big implications. We kind of had this podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about the state of the officiating that is happening in the NBA right now, how it's a bit of a mess. Obviously the NBA had this influx of new referees that came in a couple of years ago with a bunch of referees retiring. So there is like this kind of changing of the guard in the referees, if you will. I don't want to talk about refs. I want to talk about the Dallas Mavericks, because that is the issue at hand. I feel like, the point of contention, the filing for a protest, that seems a little bit desperate to me. And there are bigger issues ahead for the Dallas Mavericks. You mentioned it. They bleed points on defense. They've been bleeding pretty badly since post All-Star break. They're 5-8 since post All-Star break. They have the 7th best offense and the 24th best defense, which is very bad. It's even worse than the Sacramento Kings in that stretch. Still though, the Luka Kyrie pairing is good when it's on the court. They're plus 6.7 when they're on the court together, 122.6 offensive rating, but also 115 defensive rating, which would be at, again, bottom 10 defense for sure. They have looked good together when they have played. Obviously, they've kind of missed time here and there, so they haven't had too much time together. But Luka and Kyrie have looked good offensively. The defense is always going to be a question when you have a backcourt like that. When it comes to Jason Kidd, which I know is a very interesting point of contention for you. There have been the comments, he had the comments about, we're not here to play defense. We're here to outscore people. This is what the point of the game is. He's still not starting Christian Wood. Although I will say, the Christian Wood, Kyrie, Luka minutes haven't been good. There haven't been a lot. 23 minutes. They are a minus 57 in those 23 minutes, which is god awful. Like, it's like, how do you even do that in 23 minutes? That's impressive in its own way.
Right.
So I'm curious to see what your read is on all of that, on Jason Kidd moving forward, on Christian Wood moving forward, how this team can potentially muster up some kind of formidable defense. And where do you sit on that side when it comes to J Kidd?
A lot of things to pick apart there. I think you got to start with Kyrie and Luka, and I hate to even bring him up, but Jeff Van Gundy said on the broadcast last night that the Mavericks' MO right now is to just go out there and beat you with their offense. Everyone knows that. There's no secret there. And I think if you're a Mavs fan or you're following the Mavs or whatever, when you look and you had the initial questions of, okay, Kyrie likes to play with pace, Kyrie can play off ball, can these two work together? Small sample size, but they do look good together. And so knowing that you've got those two and that it can work in terms of the offensive production, and it's really about kind of filling in the pieces around, for the future, if that's the mindset you're operating under, which I think they have no choice but to do that. I do think that you're optimistic with having those two at the nucleus of your team. Christian Wood kind of taking the next step out at the beginning of the season, playing really well with Luka. Their personalities even seem to go really well. They complemented each other a lot. Their play styles, their personalities, everything. But it just doesn't seem like it's necessarily a good fit. And personally, I do think that falls on Jason Kidd for not being able to maximize him in whatever that looks like. I know there were conversations about him in that sixth man of the year conversation for a little while, but to me, that was really just a consequence of a starter quality player in bench role minutes. It wasn't necessarily, and that's not a knock on him. It's really a knock on Jason Kidd not making the adjustment. And so,
well, it's putting him in a position to succeed, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think on one hand, it's like, okay, well, if you had a better big or somebody that maybe complemented Luka in the starting lineup, then yeah, maybe that would be a good role for him to kind of stagger and come off the bench and just dominate opposing bench bigs. I could see the logic there, but we don't have more talented bigs than Christian Wood. And you could make an argument with Maxey and the defensive impact, especially with the Kyrie, Luka, Christian Wood minutes for sure, but the position that they find themselves in right now, they're so shorthanded in terms of big rotation. They have guys, they have bodies, but it just doesn't work. And so for Jason Kidd, you continue to look at him and say, okay, well, what are you going to do? You got to switch something up. You got to do something because you can't keep giving up this many points, this many rebounds, uncontested shot. Like it's very bad to watch. And they just don't seem that interested in trying to switch something up. And so for Jason Kidd, what does that mean for his future? I think these final 9 games are really going to determine that. I do believe if they find themselves in a play-in game, both Kyrie and Luka will their ways onto that court, and I would bet money that they come out of the play-in game, or out of the play-in. But I think right now it's kind of, I don't want to say do or die for Jason Kidd. That's pretty, dramatic. But
also, given the relationship him and Kyrie have,
that's also another big part of it.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious how stable is the ground J. Kidd walks on right now? Because, from your perspective, I think all of the concerns you just mentioned are completely valid.
Absolutely.
I think even from the remarks and comments he's made throughout the season, you sort of question. It's like, I don't know if he kind of gets what the idea of this team should be. But at the same time, there's obviously the Kyrie connection. Kyrie's free agency this summer is going to be very important.
Yep.
That's going to be a point of contention if you end up losing J. Kidd, who is a guy that Kyrie idolized when he grew up. It's a big part of their pitch to him. It's like, hey, we have J. Kidd. So I'm curious how that plays out.
Yeah. And he does have, I believe it's 2 years after this season on his deal. And so that's why I hesitate to say do or die, because in my mind, even though they're middle of the pack and they're in the same conversation record-wise as a lot of other big-name teams, on a night-to-night basis watching this team, it's awful. It's truly so awful to watch them, and you can't help but fault Jason Kidd for the lack of movement, the lack of adjustments, all of that. And so it's very frustrating, but it's also, like you mentioned with the Kyrie of it all, it's kind of, they're now playing this, okay, chicken or the egg thing. Do we want to go into another season with a coach where we kind of know that's a formula that's probably not going to work, or do we say, okay, well, we at least need to keep him for another year until we can get Kyrie to dot that line? Or is that really pushing your bet with Luka again, maybe writing off another season? I don't want to doom and gloom that, but these are all very real questions that I think they need to be asking themselves. And I will say that if I had to guess with Mark Cuban and just knowing what I know about him, his priority number one will be keeping Kyrie. And if that means keeping Jason Kidd and gives him even, you could say, an excuse to keep one of his guys around, I think he's going to go just fully commit to that, make sure they bring Kyrie back if they can, and if he's interested in signing that extension. We'll see. But right now, if I'm Luka, I can't envision him being too pleased with the coaching, the play calls. Like, you can see it. And so it's going to be a rough end of the season. My biggest fear right now, I think, is for them to either make the playoffs or get in the play-in, make get out of the play-in and then go into the first round, and then you kind of have these pretty even matchups across all throughout the first round, and then they come out and go on a little bit of a run just because they're so talented. That is my biggest fear, because then they're going to say, we did it. We knew it. We were right. We were right this whole time. And that's what I can't have. Hope. I cannot have that. So, yeah.
No, I get it. So it's the false hope. It's what the Hawks with the Eastern Conference Finals. I feel like sometimes that is the worst thing for a team.
It is
when they get this false, irrational confidence that they are actually further along than they are. That obviously the Hawks is like a very prevalent situation where you saw them make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, probably got an easy side of the bracket, and they end up, now it's like, oh, maybe the Hawks are contenders next year. It's like, no, that is not the actual way that works. Dallas right now, 36-37. They're a half a game back from 7. They're a game and a half back from 6. They, all the tiebreakers and whatnot, if you will. I don't imagine them catching Golden State or the Clippers. I don't think so. Maybe you have more intel on that in terms of their strength of schedule, but I think they end up being in that 7-8 spot, depending. That makes me wonder. I do agree with you that they will end up being a playoff team. I think when it comes to the play-in, it's a one-game elimination, win, and you make it. Having the best player on the court is always going to help you, and having Luka and Kyrie, that's enough. The offense will carry you for one game. You will be able to win that one game. They'll be a playoff team. I think that.
Yeah.
But then you go and look at their potential matchups in the first round, and you start to question, okay, can they beat these teams? When it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies, when it comes to the Sacramento Kings, maybe even the Phoenix Suns, who knows, depending on how things shake out. But I kind of doubt the Suns, because it would take some wild maneuvering for that to happen.
Right.
It's most likely going to be either the Memphis Grizzlies or the Sacramento Kings. In both of those series, Dallas has the best player. You could argue that Dallas might have the second best player, maybe, depending on how high you are on Ja Morant, De'Aaron Fox, and Domantas Sabonis in his All NBA season.
Right.
But the question I have for you is, matchup wise, against those two teams, do you feel confident going in to those series?
Confident. It's really difficult for me to use the word confident with this team right now, just because there are times when they throw out, obviously you got Josh Green and you have Reggie Bullock and even Maxey, who play consistently strong defensive minutes. But then you've got guys like Frank Ntilikina and even Markieff Morris, Markieff to a lesser degree, but they can throw out different looks to try and just throw different things at you, to try and at least stay subpar, and I mean subpar defensively. It's enough to where your offense is then enough to get you there. And so, as crazy as it sounds, Memphis and Sacramento, like, those are the two teams I think Dallas would feel worse about because of Sabonis, because of Jaren Jackson Jr. That makes things very, very difficult for them, because those two guys can pretty much do everything. And so, and the same goes for Jokic. But as weird as it sounds, I almost think Dallas would match up better with Denver than they would with Memphis and Sacramento, really just given the fact that Memphis and Sacramento play with a lot more pace. Not that they move the ball more than Denver, but I just personnel wise, I think the matchup, I'm not going to say that I don't think that Dallas could come out of that series. I think just because of the talent, it's hard for me to count them out of any series. It really is.
Right.
But the defense, the rim protection, like Jaren Jackson, much more so than Sabonis, just obliterates the Mavericks interior. And that's really, I mean, you could be shooting very poorly from 3, even from the free throw line, and it probably won't matter, because the points in the paint battle we've seen it night in and night out is just abysmal for the Mavericks. And so that's why I have more fear out of two guys like Domantas Sabonis and Jaren Jackson Jr. more than even someone like Jokic, because you can specifically plan for Jokic, but the pace and the movement and the paint presence of someone like a Jaren Jackson Jr. on the defensive side, it's just very difficult for the Mavs.
Right. Curious. I'm very, very curious. I think the Kings are an interesting matchup, because both those teams are not the best defensive teams, but they are also very good offensively. it would be back and forth. I think it would be a lot of fun to watch that series. Obviously the Mavericks have the best player in that series too, so that always factors into things. But I don't know. We'll see. The state of the Mavericks, it's very interesting. Not to be doom and gloom. I actually want to be kind of positive. Is like, look, the future could look bright. I'm a fan of Jaden Hardy. I think he's been awesome. Obviously, we've talked about Josh Green on this podcast before. The picks open up a little bit more flexibility wise this summer. You ink Kyrie to a deal. You can maybe package that to get a third guy, and now you have some stuff cooking. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't necessarily hate the future outlook when it comes to the Mavericks, but this season, it seems like it's a little bit of a step back, if you will,
definitely,
just to figure things out. Also, sticking with the Western Conference, actually, we're going to go through a couple of Western Conference injuries, returns, just some things that are probably going to shake out over the next 2 weeks of the season. The first thing, Paul George. He sustained an injury. I believe it was against the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was the game I was watching, and it was not a nice injury to watch. They showed the replay consistently, which I hate about TV broadcasts. I mean, I understand it because they're trying to show what happened maybe for people, the broadcast to commentate on it. But, man, the injury was awful. It looked really, really bad. Luckily, though, it's not a tear. His knee literally bent backwards, which it was, again, it was disgusting to watch. Honestly, I really feel bad. It's tough because Paul George has been at the center of two pretty gruesome injuries now. Luckily, though, this one will not be as bad as the injury that he sustained with Team USA. He's going to be out for a 2 to 3 week window, apparently, but he will be reevaluated and his mobility will be tested in 2 to 3 weeks. From there, they'll figure out how he feels. But according to Andrew Grief, I believe that's how you say his name, was told a return by George for a first-round series might be overly optimistic, which means he's probably not playing in the first round. And right now, as it stands, if the playoffs started tomorrow, they end up facing the Phoenix Suns, which is going to be an awesome series if that ends up happening. If it's the Suns versus the Clippers, Kawhi versus KD, Booker, that would be a lot of fun. But it would be much more of a battle if Paul George ends up playing. Obviously, Clippers and the Suns, they played in the Western Conference Finals, I believe, in 2021. That was the year the Suns ended up going to the finals. Paul George was incredible in that series. That was without Kawhi. So it's interesting now that it might be Kawhi without PG facing off against the Suns. And to me, man, it's like the Clippers, they can't catch a break. It just feels like they are constantly in this limbo of, we're going to get this guy back. And now that we have this guy back, okay, well, this guy's actually resting now. And we're just preparing for the playoffs. And once we get to the playoffs, no, Kawhi Leonard is injured. And then we get to the playoffs and then Paul George is injured. It just feels like every time this team builds up a little bit of momentum, they look a little bit better. Kawhi has been absolutely ridiculous in 2023. Since the calendar turned, that man is balling out. He looks probably as good as he ever has in a Clippers uniform. Paul George has had a pretty good season. Some inexplicable turnovers, although that's neither here nor there, not the conversation we're having right now. The Clippers, to me, seem a little lost in the wind. And it's sad because we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I feel like they have an immense amount of pressure on them. Yeah. So it's tough to be able to look at this Clippers team, the outlook, Kawhi in his mid-30s, Paul George in his mid-30s, PG might miss the first round series, and that's it. Another playoff exit. Disappointing playoff exit at the hands of the Phoenix Suns, which I think would happen if PG ends up not playing. So it's tough. That's all I got to say on that. It's just tough. It's really like, as a basketball fan, it's tough that you can't appreciate what this Clippers team, at full strength is supposed to be.
Right. And I think that's the most unfortunate thing about it, is because you've got this formula of these 6'7" to 6'9", just versatile, both ends of the floor, like this formula that they have put together and crafted for so long. And you've got Kawhi playing at this level. PG's still very capable of playing at a high level. And it just, like you mentioned, they just cannot all seem to be clicking all at once for a consistent period of time. And I mean, not to go down a whole side note, I'm very curious as to if this specific situation, along with maybe a handful of other situations, potentially comes into a later conversation of kind of adjusting the season, whether it be the games or however that conversation ends up evolving one day, whenever that is. But it's really unfortunate because as a fan of the NBA, this team, the talent, I mean, we've talked about what they did at the trade deadline, what they've done at previous trade deadlines. They do exactly what you were supposed to do in terms of adding good players, not giving up a whole lot, maybe even giving up future assets to win now, to go all in. They've paid the money. They do exactly what you're supposed to do. And they just can't show up every year. And it's unfortunate. And so I'm curious to see what the NBA thinks about this situation, because I'm sure they're always monitoring these things and having conversations about just making the product of the league better. But it's really, really unfortunate. And I don't know. I hope I was shocked PG's injury was the timetable was as short as it was. I'm not saying that it's short, but it was. I didn't like that. It
looked way worse. It looked
way worse.
It looked like he was out for the season and potentially a chunk of next season. That's what it looked like. So yeah, I don't know. There is a chance that the Clippers can end up catching a little bit of a break here, because if they slide in the standings, let's say they end up as the 6th seed, and now, okay, you're looking at a matchup against the Kings or the Grizzlies, and you're like, okay, with Kawhi, we have a cast of great rotation players, great role players that we can play with them. Maybe we can beat the Kings. In fact, I think I would be pretty confident in saying that the Clippers with Kawhi and what he has done. I mean, shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse there, but shit, like the Kawhi did that to the Mavericks, you know, and like he single-handedly brought that team and willed that team to a win in a playoff series. I think he can do a very similar thing against the Kings. I don't think he can do that against the Suns. The Suns are just too much firepower, especially if Durant is back. We don't know that yet, but I think there's a chance the Clippers can still be okay here if they can drop to 6. Keep 6, and then now you're looking at, okay, we're facing Sacramento, we're facing Memphis, we've got Kawhi, we have the best player in the series, we feel confident. Let's roll. So there is not to be, I don't want to be doom and gloom, let's end it on a positive note. Paul George is out, but hey, it's not the end of the world for the Clippers. They can still get out of this. On the other side of this, I mentioned them a little bit earlier. Ja Morant, he returned against the Houston Rockets earlier this week after, an 8-game suspension, 5 of that retroactively. He had 17, 5 and 4, 2 steals, a block. He looked good. He had a really, really nasty dunk. Looked like his regular old self. Maybe he kind of needed to get the wings back a little bit, cardio-wise, probably get that in rhythm. But look, there's 2 weeks left in the regular season. It's more than enough time for Ja to kind of get back to where he can be. And he looked pretty good out the gate. I don't think there was an issue there. The main question here is, like, they were looking at least with Ja, there was this assumption that he was going to miss the regular season, or at the very least miss the entire season. I mean, there was a potential that he'd miss the entire season. Now he's not. The Grizzlies, they've been the second best team in the Western Conference all season. They've been very, very good when Ja is playing. They have a very solid trio of players, and then some supporting players that are good, but they still won't have Brandon Clark for the rest of the season. Dylan Brooks is still racking up technical fouls. I'm curious if this team has enough to push it and make a big run in the West playoffs this year, because now they're nearly at full strength. I know Brandon Clark is a big part of what they do. They're going to miss him. Steven Adams also, I forgot to mention, a huge question mark. He obviously had the knee injections that he recently did, and he's out indefinitely. And I think those two guys are going to play a huge part in what this Grizzlies team looks like. But with Ja back, are you at least a little bit more confident in the Grizzlies' ability to even win a first-round series, a second-round series, potentially make it to the Western Conference Finals?
Definitely. I think getting Ja back at the time that you did, couple games left, kind of like you said, get your wings back, get the cardio in, kind of get things back before it's really game time. And as they always say, every possession matters. I think if you're a Grizzlies fan, it's good timing for you, and you have no reason to not be as confident as you have been since probably the beginning of last season, when I think it all started, or whenever that was. Right. But I would be confident. I think we've seen all year long how close the Western Conference is. And if you're the Grizzlies, you're at the top. You've got your guy coming back. Jaren has continued to be Jaren. You've even got guys like David Roddy stepping up and impressing, Santiago Aldama. Like, you've got many guys that can step up and kind of fill those gaps of, I mean, you don't have a Steven Adams, like a similar player to that, but you can adjust the formula a little bit to fill those gaps. And I think that their roster is well equipped to do so. I think they're a good matchup against, I mean, talent-wise, defense-wise, pace-wise. I mean, they're a good matchup against a lot of teams. So I absolutely, if I'm the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm feeling confident for sure.
My only question is a team that can slow them down in the playoffs. So if there's a team that can grind them to a halt, force them to play a lot of half-court offense, and without Steven Adams, their half-court offense has been really, really bad. It's been really tough to watch. I am curious to see, let's say, a team like the Clippers, who doesn't play at a very high blistering pace, or the Suns, who do play with a certain amount of pace, but they can also beat you down in the half court. They can slow the game down on you. I think those type of teams are a hard matchup for the Grizzlies, and I think that's the question I have is, okay, when things slow down, when things are grinding to a halt, and you have to generate points, you have to generate buckets. Shout out to Winston. There is a question of, like, how does this team look in clutch situations? How does this team generate enough baskets when it means and when it matters? So that's the question I have with the Grizzlies moving forward, and obviously Ja is a huge part of that equation. So we'll see what happens there. It's good to have him back though. Another guy coming back, Western Conference as well, Karl Anthony Towns. He returned against the Atlanta Hawks, dropped 22, 4 and 3, had 2 steals in 26 minutes, hit clutch shots. Ant is still out indefinitely, so we don't know when he's coming back. Apparently the report is that he's day-to-day, so there is, more optimism that he returns, and now the Timberwolves are back to full strength. Obviously Cat, Gobert, Anthony Edwards. They now have Mike Conley in the fold as well. That's going to be interesting for your Mavericks, who are fighting for playoff and play-in positioning with them, because I think the Timberwolves are in a position where they can kind of rise up here a little bit. Do you feel the same?
I do think it's possible for them. I think getting Cat back and him having a performance like that is a really good sign for them. Personally, I had my doubts on if he would kind of come back and step right in and just how things would look, because I have many questions with the Timberwolves, excuse me. So, I mean, I could see them rising up. I'll be interested to see how they kind of finish the season out. I will say, like, personally, I do think that they're a team that I probably feel lower
comfortable with. Yeah,
like, I mean, from a Mavs perspective, well, that's another conversation, but I just don't feel a whole lot of confidence in the formula that they're putting out there. They could prove me wrong, but I think that there are other teams kind of in that range that are we just got done talking about the Clippers, and even with the Paul George injury, I still feel like the formula that they have, the coaching, Kawhi's play, like, I feel I have more confidence in them than I do the Timberwolves. And so I'm curious to see how these final games go, because I don't have the strength of schedule for this last little bit, but I know the Mavs have a back-to-back against the Hornets. They have a game against the Spurs. So I'm curious to see a team like the Timberwolves getting a guy back like Karl Anthony Towns and seeing if their schedule is too tough down to finish out, if they're kind of set up for success to end the season and end on a good note going into the playoffs, or if they kind of got a tough road to wrap things up while bringing Karl back. That's a tough hurdle.
It's always funny. We've talked about pretty much every playing team here, and OKC just quietly, just trudging along, just doing its thing, playing very good basketball, solid defense. SGA is awesome. Giddey, Jalen Williams, obviously climbing up the rookie ladders. It's just like they've been so solidly good all year. That team is terrifying to think of future-wise. Zion Williamson, he is going to be reevaluated. I can't speak for some reason. Reevaluated in 2 weeks. The Pelicans, they just beat the Hornets tonight, so they move up a little bit. They've won 3 in a row. Brandon Ingram had a triple-double tonight, which was awesome to watch. They're still in the play-in mix, and with Zion coming back, being reevaluated in 2 weeks, there's, I guess, some hope there that he can maybe play in the play-in games, maybe make them a playoff team. I would be interested to see that. I mean, look, Zion, when the Pelicans were at their peak in November and December, they were, the first seed in the Western Conference. Zion was incredible. It is crazy the roller coaster this team has been on, Lauren. I mean, to go from, okay, Brandon Ingram's hurt, Zion is playing MVP basketball, they look great. Then Zion gets hurt, Brandon Ingram comes back, he doesn't look like himself. The Pelicans struggle deeply. There's a bunch of rotation issues. Jonas Valanciunas isn't getting the ball enough. Pelicans Twitter, I understand your grief there. And now they're starting to figure things out a little bit more. They're still in the play-in hunt. Question is, though, how do you really feel confident in the fact that, okay, just throw Zion in a game and they have to figure out all these moving parts in a play-in game when BI and Zion haven't played that much together this season? In fact, in general, Zion and BI, through their time together, haven't been on the court that much together.
Right.
So to be able to have all that craziness, it's similar to the Timberwolves situation where Cat and Gobert didn't look good together in the time that they played together at the start of the season, and they haven't had a lot of time to adjust, to figure things out. Now, luckily for the Timberwolves, Cat's here for the next 2 weeks, and they can figure that out going into the play-in. But for the Pelicans, it's like you're just throwing them into the wild. And if they end up making the play-in, now you're in the situation where it's like, okay, how does this look? What is the,
Yeah, I'm curious to see how all in they go, because they're right there. They are right there to being in that play-in game, and you've got a lot of talent. You've got the coaching, the defense. I mean, they're right there, but we continue to see the Zion big question marks. And the reason I'm curious to see how all in they go is because I do think it's quite the spectrum. On one hand, I'm not saying that I think that they would shut Zion down and just call it a year and call it a wrap. I'm not saying that,
right.
But I do think that there is a conversation that's being had at some level within the organization saying, okay, well, if there was a point in time during this year where we were at the top and we can battle with the best of them. So why not go full speed ahead, bring Zion back? Let's just go for it. And we feel confident going up one step at a time through the play-in, and we feel confident from there on. And let's see how far this thing can go. And then I see on the other hand, the preventative. How many more times do we have to see Zion? Is it just better to get to the offseason, focus on the preventative of it all, and moving forward into the next season, coming out strong and going from there? So I do think that those are very, very different outcomes for them. And luckily, I think they are in a good position that moving forward, they're going to be just fine. But this season has just been weird for so many reasons. And for the
Incredibly.
Pelicans,
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned it, the roller coaster ride for them. So I do think the more likely option for them is not to, I don't want to say shut it down or call it quits or anything like that. That's not what it is. But I do think that kind of maybe looking forward might be in their best interest.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens, folks. We just talked about a bunch of play-in, playoff type teams. The race is still wide open. I mean, in the Western Conference, you have the Pelicans, who are technically tied for 10th right now, although the Lakers have the advantage there. They are only 2.5 games back of 5th. 2.5 games back of 5th. They're actually 3 games back of 4th in the Western Conference, and they are 11th, which is just crazy to think about. The West is such a headache in terms of literally every single day the standings are changing. They're flip-flopping. OKC and the Clippers are about to play right now, and that's going to have an impact on the standings and how that looks. Obviously, it's very important for your Dallas Mavericks. Lauren, we're going to talk about pressure. Pressure makes diamonds, as they say, but also there is a lot of pressure on some of these NBA teams going into the playoffs. There's tons of pressure around some of these teams, and maybe enough pressure for something to burst. So, applying pressure, word to J. Cole, ladies and gentlemen. I feel like there's more pressure. Maybe this is just crazy to think about, but with it being so tight up top, at the top of the Eastern Conference, at the top of the Western Conference, even all through the Western Conference, I feel like there's an immense amount of pressure for this season to be the season for one of these teams. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pressure on a lot of teams. I mean, going down the standings, if you look at, the Milwaukee Bucks, do they have a ton of pressure? I don't necessarily think so. I think they have Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think they have Chris Middleton. I mean, obviously there's some contract stuff that's going to be dealt with, but for the most part, I think that team is pretty comfortably good for the next couple of seasons. We've talked about the age factor there. I don't think that's that much of a pressure point for them to think, oh, we're completely doomed if we don't win an NBA championship this season. The Boston Celtics, however, I think there is a bit of pressure there.
Yeah.
I think especially with Jaylen Brown's comments, there's even more pressure now. And the way that they've struggled in the last month or so, they haven't looked the greatest, adds more pressure. And the fact that Jason Tatum has struggled in clutch. Obviously, there was that mention in the JJ Redick podcast of like how inefficient he is in clutch time shooting. And I think there is a lot of pressure on the Celtics. I want to say the team I have, like, this team has the most amount of pressure is this next team in the Eastern Conference, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers. I think they have the most pressure in the entire NBA playoff picture. The reason I say that is because Joel Embiid, he's playing out of his mind again, MVP caliber season, probably going to end up winning the MVP the way it's looking, the way the dialogue is moving. James Harden has played incredible as a second fiddle. I mean, the pairing of them has looked great. This is the best supporting cast Joel Embiid has ever had. And there is pressure for him and Harden to both show up in the playoffs, quite simply. To just be able to do the things they've done in the regular season, year in, year out, but do it in the playoffs when it matters. And on top of that, obviously, there's tons of pressure with the Sixers organization, the fans, Doc Rivers. I mean, you name it. There's a ton of pressure points from the perspective of the Sixers. So I think if we're looking at the Eastern Conference, they have the most pressure. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree in the Eastern Conference. They are the ones that have the most pressure. I agree with what you said about the top two teams, especially with the Celtics. While there are factors there, you can really go down the list with Philadelphia, especially looking at James Harden's playoff history, Embiid's durability, and having the table set in terms of having the players, the supporting cast. I mean, Tyrese Maxey, like everything that you need.
Yeah.
The talent is there. You have the faith and the talent of your top two guys to go to bat with any team in the East. So because of that, I absolutely think that there is an immense amount of pressure. And I'm curious to see how the rotation changes, how the play calling, the shot selection, what changes come playoff time for that team. And if it works, because there have been not just with the 76ers specifically, but across the league, we've seen the game change and it just not work. And so, I don't necessarily expect that to be the case with the 76ers, but I am curious to see how they handle the pressure, how they handle the talk, and just how if they can get it done and what because would you say it's fair that it's championship or bust for them?
I would say at the very least, it's conference finals or bust with them.
Okay, that's fair.
I think if they make it to the conference finals, they push Milwaukee to 6 or 7 or Boston to 6 or 7, depending on how things shake out. I don't know how it will shake out, because also that's another factor into this is like between those three teams, it could change the order, right?
Right.
Home court advantage, all that stuff. I think if they give a valiant effort, Harden and Embiid do their thing, they push them, Eastern Conference Finals, they get there for the first time since 2001. They are really, really, even saying that shows
wild.
You how much pressure they're under. Yeah, if they make it to the finals, I honestly think if the Sixers make it to the finals, you call that season a success, regardless of if they end up winning the NBA championship. And I think if the Sixers do end up making it to the finals, they've already beat the hard competition. Like, I really do think
agree with that. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So to your point and to your question, I think it'd be Eastern Conference Finals or bust for this team. And look, the James Harden rumors have been lingering. They've been around us, like the Tweety Bird thing in Looney Tunes. It's like we've heard of it so many times of he might go back to Houston, and there's this rumor of him wanting to go back because it's his home, and maybe that is applying a certain amount of pressure on the Sixers front office to pay up because he took a short-term contract in order for them to pay that type of money to him, and he has delivered this season. So I think I don't think there's as much credence to the Harden to Rockets thing as people are saying, but at the same time, it is pressure. That is added pressure because you don't know what's next. And if Harden's out, if Doc Rivers is out, now you're asking the question, okay, so is Embiid next? And then ladies and gentlemen, that is the panic button right
that's
there.
an unraveling.
Smashing the panic. It's an unraveling. The process is over. Everything is done. You start from scratch. It's done. That is the implications of the Sixers losing in the first round, losing in the second round even. I think genuinely there are some, if they don't make it to the conference finals, there are going to be a lot of questions about what this team can be moving forward. So yeah, I would say in the East, it is the Philadelphia 76ers. But, on a side note, I do think there is a little bit of pressure on the Miami Heat.
Although I like the honorable mention for the Heat because I think that one is getting maybe sliding under the rug for a lot of people just because everybody's eyes are on Milwaukee, Philly, and Boston.
Miami hasn't been good this year, right? They haven't
been good. The Kyle Lowry situation, the lack of draft capital to really go out and make moves. They're in a sticky situation, and I think that is something that could be coming up real quick in terms of conversations in the near future of, okay, we got to shake something up or somebody's got to go. Who that will be, we'll see. But that's definitely one to keep an eye on.
And Jimmy has had some comments this year that has made me intrigued at the very least of the idea of like, maybe there is some dissatisfaction in what's happening in Miami. And look, I don't think there is as much pressure on them because it just feels like this is not their season. They haven't had a very good season. It's been back and forth, flip-flopping. They haven't been that healthy either. So I don't know. They always have a puncher's chance in any playoff series because of Jimmy Butler, because of the fact that they have the top-tier talent in Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. It's always interesting, even in the regular season when they end up facing the Clippers or not the Clippers, the Celtics or the Bucks. They have a chance. They have a puncher's chance all the time. So it will be interesting. Western Conference is maybe a little bit more open of a discussion here in terms of pressure. I think, one of the teams we mentioned probably at the top of the show should be the team, and that's the Clippers. I imagine that's probably what you thought of. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll let you do the Clippers spiel. I have another team in mind, though.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I think personally I got about 3, maybe even 4 teams that there's some pressure, but I think the Clippers is a big one, really just given the age and the injury history. And I said it before, it is incredibly unfortunate what we've seen happen to them. But I think you look around at, on one hand, we talk about New Orleans and everything that they've struggled with, but because they're so young, it's a completely different conversation than what we're having with the Clippers. And obviously they haven't had as many years together, the Pelicans, and they're completely different situations. But in terms of the injuries, the availability of your star core players, it's just a completely different reality given the age. And so with Kawhi, I think it's incredibly encouraging that they're seeing Kawhi play at the level that he's playing at. And I agree with you that given certain matchups, they may be able to squeak it out to where you get Paul George back. And maybe, who knows, in a month, this conversation could be completely irrelevant and they could go on a roll. But I think right now, as of today, you have serious concerns. There is a lot of pressure. And sometimes, Kawhi could have this, like, the playoff performance of his life, but if they're going up against a loaded opponent, and especially like the Phoenix matchup, that to me is not a good one. If you're without PG, that's very difficult. And then at that point, what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you continue to double down until it has officially run its course, or do you eventually blow it up? And today, right now, it is difficult for me to see Steve Ballmer at some point saying, okay, the injuries, enough is enough, I'm blowing it up. And that's hard for me to see. So I still think that there's a lot of pressure.
I don't think he's that type.
I don't think he is either. I think it would take somebody leaving. And that is also something that I don't know that I necessarily see right now. But who knows, if Kawhi's playing at a crazy level and he's like, I can't continue to just keep holding on to hope that we're all going to be healthy year after year. Right. I'm ready to win again. I think that there's potential for a real conversation to be had there, but who knows? That's why there's pressure.
That's why there's pressure. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Paul George injury now just adds this hypothetical scenario. I feel like with the Clippers, it's constantly been this hypothetical of, oh, if Kawhi was healthy, then yes, of course they'd be a finals team. Or, oh, if Paul George was healthy, yes, of course they'd be a finals team. Oh, if they have a point guard, they would be a championship contender. And honestly, we've been doing a lot of what ifs with the Clippers. At some point, those what ifs just end up catching up to you, and that's why there's tons of pressure right now. The other team I was going to mention, and I think this is interesting because of how young this team is. That's the Denver Nuggets. I think the Nuggets have a really considerable amount of pressure on them this season to at the very least prove that this right here, what they're building, their core, their nucleus with Murray and Porter Jr. and Jokic and Gordon and KCP and all those guys, at the very least, that it can be a formidable playoff team. They've shown it in the regular season that they can do great things. Jokic has shown it in the regular season. Murray has been an incredible playoff, performer, but I just think there's a level of pressure for that team, especially its main star in Nikola Jokic, to prove, okay, I'm a two-time MVP. I'm a guy who you can build around. I'm a guy who you can rely on in the playoffs. I'm a guy who won't be exposed defensively in the playoffs. I think these are the questions moving forward for Denver. Now, again, this conversation could look incredibly stupid in a month if they end up being a Western Conference Finals team. Because if they do end up making the Western Conference Finals, and let's say, right now, they would end up playing either the Suns or the Clippers in the second round, and I don't love their chances against either team. I'm not a big fan. I to be fair, the Nuggets have had the Clippers card all year consistently. And you know what? Since the bubble, they've absolutely dominated that matchup. It's like a mental thing. I think the Nuggets would beat the Clippers. But the Phoenix Suns, I do not love that matchup for them. Don't like it one bit. It's a defensive nightmare for Nikola Jokic. So if they end up losing to the Suns in the second round, a Suns team who has not had a lot of time to acclimate Kevin Durant, who doesn't have the bench and the depth and the rotation that they will have next season, then I think if you're Denver, you're looking at yourself and saying, man, we had one of the best seasons in franchise history. Jokic was an MVP candidate again. He almost won 3 in a row. Murray looks great. Porter Jr. looks great. And we just lost to the Suns, who on a whim traded for Kevin Durant and were pretty much, it's Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Chris Paul, and then scraps, and it's like, how do you reconcile that? How do you say, okay, we're going to just run it back and try it again because without having any feasible changes? I think looking at Michael Malone as a head coach and what kind of adjustments he makes, I think that's probably the change that would happen if they lose in the second round. So that's my questions with Denver. I think there is a certain amount of pressure for this team to perform and perform well in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially because when we talk about, we've had many conversations when even talking about the MVP race and just the dominant year that Jokic is having and how it's translated to this team success that they're having and just how dominant that they have been. And so for all of those things to be true and then playoffs come around and you're just not that dominant team anymore, this is it. You know what I mean? You have all the pieces in play. If you can't get it done now, I think it's a very valid question to say, are you ever going to be able to get it done with this formula? Because this seems to be the year. You've got other teams that have very serious concerns, whether it be Phoenix, quote unquote, not having a bench, Clippers not having Paul George, the Mavs having no defense, the Warriors, no Wiggins. Like every team has got some sort of big question mark. And so
what's your excuse?
Exactly. There's no excuse anymore. And so I completely agree that there is a lot of pressure there. And I think that we would both be, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel that we would both be on the same page that it's not pressure of, oh, Jokic is going to want out. It's more of pressure of a significant roster overhaul in terms of like a Jamal Murray or even like a Michael Porter Jr. Like we've got to switch up the number 2 or even the number 3 because the piece of the Bruce Brown, like the pieces in there are good. They even got some interesting young guys, Zeke, Najee, Christian Brown. Like they've got good guys. They just, I don't know that they're going to get it done. I think that there's valid concerns there. So I'm curious to see what that looks like should that become their reality in the off season. and who their targets might then be. I think that could be a really intriguing conversation. But again, they're another team that I do believe, as of right now, you have to have all the confidence in the world in your coach and your team, and just go from there. But
they haven't. Absolutely, they haven't inspired much confidence in their play in March. To be fair, they've kind of struggled here, and I think that's where some of these questions pop up. Where it's like, okay, so maybe is this the a lot of people will mention this, but like, is this kind of like what the Utah Jazz were with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert? And I'm not saying we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet. I think the Nuggets have proven that they are a better playoff team than that. I think the bubble run, what they've done, even without the injuries and whatnot, I think there's more time. Obviously, their guys are super young too, so that they're afforded that luxury. There's pressure. There is pressure there. I'm sorry, Nuggets fans. There is pressure at the end of the day for you guys to do well. And that happens when you have a 2-time MVP, folks. It's sort of the same thing that, you can speak on this very, very much, but look, Dirk Nowitzki, man. Dirk Nowitzki. And there was always the conversation. It's like, can he do it in the playoffs? Can Dirk Nowitzki be the guy to lift the team? Can he be the number one guy on a championship team? Let's see. And then, 1 year, 2011 happens, and all those questions are erased. Everything that anybody had ever questioned about Dirk vanishes just like that. I think that was probably one of the biggest narrative-changing championship runs in NBA history. Because Dirk went from a guy who, yes, he's an MVP, great player, yada, 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 to, he might be like the greatest shooter of all time and like shooting big of all time. And, by the way, he's going to be a top 20, top 25 player all time as well. It kind of put him in the right place of history with that championship. I think the same thing sort of applies to Nikola Jokic moving forward. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I like the comparison because when you look at Jokic in this roster, without going on a whole tangent, I think there are somewhat similarities with that Mavs roster in 2011, just in terms of the less flashy players and having guys that fit their role well and are utility guys that do what you need them to do to win playoff basketball and win the games that matter, even just the plays that matter. And so I think that there are some interesting similarities there. And again,
they just need Tyson Chandler. They just need Tyson Chandler. That's all they need.
Everybody needs Tyson Chandler, I swear to God.
Even the Mavericks right now could use Tyson Chandler.
The Mavericks could use 39.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Oh man, but yeah, I think the Jokic storyline and the similarities there, I do think there's something there, and I do hope for his sake that if this is his year, I would be over the moon for him because he deserves it.
It'd be awesome. Yeah.
They deserve it. But I have some serious doubts there, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It just feels like the top of the Western Conference is so for the taking, and it's so weird. We talked about this last time at the playoffs, where it's like maybe the bottom of the West is actually more talented than the top of the West, and now you're left in this situation where it's like, okay, these teams proved it all year, but then we know on paper these teams are probably more talented. How does that compare, and how does that add up in the playoffs? Ladies and gentlemen, we will figure that out in the next couple of weeks. We'll figure that out in the next month or so. But we appreciate you guys tapping into the Objective Basketball Podcast. As always, do the subscribing, do the rating if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever. Thank you very much for the people who are listening and watching on YouTube to see our pretty faces. And we appreciate you. Thank you so much. You guys have a good day. Lauren, I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Follow hosts at Just S. Barahini on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you.